I grew up in St. Louis, and I've always been a city guy, and the closest I ever got to nature was the city park. My wife, Anna, is the opposite. She grew up in the mountains of western North Carolina, and she's happiest when she's outside, hiking, camping, or just sitting on a porch with a mug of coffee, watching the sun come up. When we got married last year, she told me all she wanted for our honeymoon was a week in the mountains, somewhere quiet and green, where she could show me the places she loved as a kid. I wanted her to have that, so we booked a little cabin about an hour from her hometown. It was the kind of place you find on those rental sites. Old, but charming, with a stone fireplace, a big porch, and a view of the valley that looked like something out of a painting. The owner, Rick, met us when we arrived. He was a big guy, probably in his late 50s, with a thick accent and a handshake that could crush your fingers. He seemed friendly, maybe a little too friendly, but I chalked it up to small-town hospitality. He gave us the keys, told us to call if we needed anything, and drove off in his old red pickup. The first couple of days were perfect. Anna was in her element, waking up with the sun, making coffee, and dragging me out for hikes. She'd point out wildflowers and tell me stories about camping trips she'd taken with her dad. I'd never seen her so happy. At night, we'd sit on the porch, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant sound of a creek. I remember thinking, this is what people mean when they talk about peace and quiet. By the third night, though, things started to feel off. It was little things at first. Anna's hiking boots, which she always left on the porch, were moved. One was on its side, halfway down the steps. I found my phone charger unplugged and sitting on the kitchen counter, even though I was sure I'd left it plugged in by the bed. We both laughed it off, blaming each other for being forgetful. But I could tell Anna was uneasy. That evening, as the sun was setting, we heard a car pull up outside. I looked out the window and saw a red pickup parked at the end of the drive. A man got out, middle-aged, wearing a faded jacket and a ball cap pulled low. He didn't come to the door, just stood by his truck, looking up at the cabin. After a few minutes, he got back in and drove off. Anna watched him go, her face tight. I asked if she knew him, but she just shook her head. We tried to shake it off, but the mood had changed. That night, Anna was restless. She kept getting up to check the locks, peeking out the window into the dark. I tried to reassure her, but I was starting to feel it too. A sense that we weren't as alone as we thought. The next morning, we found muddy footprints on the porch. They were big, definitely not Anna's, and they led right up to the door. My wallet was missing from the kitchen counter. At first, I thought maybe I'd misplaced it, but we tore the place apart and found nothing. Anna's boots were gone, too. I called Rick, and he said he'd come by to check things out. He showed up an hour later, acting concerned, but he didn't really do anything, except walk around the porch and say he'd keep an eye out. He told us there had been some break-ins at cabins in the area, but not to worry. He'd let the sheriff know. I remember thinking it was weird how Rick seemed to know exactly what was missing before we even told him. He kept asking if we'd left anything else out or if we'd seen anyone hanging around. At the time, I just thought he was being thorough, but looking back, it felt off. That afternoon, Anna wanted to go for a drive, just to get out of the cabin. We ended up at a little diner in town, and she barely touched her food. She kept glancing at the door, and I could tell she was on edge. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but I know we both felt like something was wrong. We drove back to the cabin as the sun was going down. The woods felt different, darker, closer, like they were pressing in on us. When we pulled up, I noticed the red pickup parked down the road, half hidden behind some trees. I pointed it out to Anna, but she just shook her head and went inside. That night, we tried to act normal. We made soup, played cards, and watched an old movie on my laptop. Around midnight, we heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate, like someone was taking their time. I got up and looked out the window, but all I could see was darkness. Anna was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone. I tried to call the police, but the signal was terrible. The call dropped twice, before I could even get through. I texted my brother our location, just in case, and we sat there in the dark, listening. The footsteps circled the cabin, stopping every so often, then starting up again. At one point, we heard someone try the door handle. Anna started to cry, and I just held her, feeling completely helpless. Eventually, the footsteps faded away. We didn't sleep at all. As soon as the sun came up, we packed our bags and loaded the car. As we were leaving, I noticed the front door was slightly open, even though I was sure I'd locked it the night before. Nothing else seemed missing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. We drove straight to the sheriff's office in town. The deputy listened to our story, took down our information, and said they'd look into it. He mentioned there had been a string of thefts and break-ins at cabins in the area, and that they suspected someone local was involved. When I mentioned Rick, the owner, the deputy's face changed. He asked a few more questions, then told us quietly that Rick had been under investigation for a while. Apparently, he'd been tipping off a friend about when guests would be out hiking or asleep, and they'd break in and steal whatever they could find: wallets, jewelry, electronics. Sometimes, they'd just try to scare people off and then loot the place after they left. The cabin was shut down a few weeks later. We got a call from the sheriff saying they'd arrested Rick and his friend, the guy in the red pickup. They found a stash of stolen stuff in a shed behind Rick's house: my wallet, Anna's boots, and a bunch of other things from different guests. We got most of our things back, but honestly, I still feel like we left something behind in those woods. Anna doesn't talk about it, and I don't push her. Sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up and think I hear footsteps outside our window, and I wonder if we ever really left that cabin behind. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels wrong, trust your gut. Some people are worse than anything you'll find in the dark. Look, this might sound funny, but I feel like I need to share this, just to show how you never really know what people are capable of, even the ones who are supposed to be family. I'm not saying where we live, just because I don't want any more drama, but it's a quiet suburb, the kind of place where people wave when they walk their dogs, and everyone's lawn looks the same. My wife and I got married last year, and honestly, I thought I'd lucked out with her family. They were big on Sunday dinners, always sending group texts, and her mom would drop off homemade cookies every couple weeks. It was the kind of family I always wished I'd had growing up. Her older brother, Eric, was just part of the background at first, quiet, polite, always helping their mom carry in groceries or set the table, but never really saying much to me. I figured he was just shy, or maybe just not a big talker. But after the wedding, something changed. He started showing up at our place a lot, and not in a friendly way. It was more like he was checking up on us, or maybe just checking up on me. At first, it was just awkward. He'd come by unannounced, sometimes late at night, and just stand in the doorway, asking if my wife was home. He'd barely look at me, barely say a word, just kind of stare past me into the house. I'd tell him she was busy, or we were about to eat, but he'd just stand there, not moving, until I basically had to close the door on him. I tried to brush it off. I told myself he was just being protective, maybe having a hard time letting go of his little sister. But then he started calling my phone. Not hers. I never gave him my number, but he'd call late at night, sometimes just breathing on the line, sometimes asking weird questions like, "You ever leave the back door unlocked?" Or, "You ever worry about someone getting in?" I'd hang up, but he'd call again a few days later, always from a different number. I started blocking every unknown number that popped up, but it didn't stop. One night, I was coming home from work and saw Eric's car parked at the end of our street. He was just sitting there, engine off, lights off, staring at our house. I parked a few houses down and waited, just to see what he'd do. After a while, he got out, walked up to our driveway, and just stood there, looking at the house. He didn't ring the bell or knock. He just stood there for a few minutes, then got back in his car and then drove off. I never told my wife about that because honestly, I didn't want to scare her. It got worse. I started getting these weird texts, stuff like, "You don't deserve her," or "You should leave before you ruin her life." Sometimes I'd get a picture of our house, taken from the street at night. It got worse. I started getting these weird texts, stuff like, "You don't deserve her," or "You should leave before you ruin her life." Sometimes I'd get a picture of our house, taken from the street at night. Once, I got a photo of me and my wife through our living room window. I started keeping the blinds closed all the time. I even bought new locks for the doors and put up a camera by the front door, but Eric never came to the door again. Instead, I'd catch glimpses of him in the background, walking past the house, sitting in his car, just watching. I tried to talk to my wife about it, but she was stuck in the middle. She said Eric had always been a little intense, but he'd never acted like this before. She promised to talk to him, but nothing changed. If anything, he just got more careful. He stopped coming to the door, but I'd see his car parked down the block, or catch a glimpse of him walking past the house late at night. The worst was the night I woke up and saw someone standing in our backyard, just outside the bedroom window. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was Eric. He just stood there, not moving, for what felt like forever. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, I found footprints in the dew on the grass, leading from the back fence to our window and back out again. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home. I'd check the locks 3 times before bed, peek out the windows before turning off the lights, and jump at every car that slowed down in front of our house. My wife tried to act like everything was normal, but I could tell she was scared too. She started sleeping with her phone under her pillow, and she'd flinch every time the doorbell rang. One afternoon, I came home early from work and found Eric's car parked a few houses down. I sat in my car and watched as he walked up to our house, looked around, and tried the front door. When it didn't open, he just stood there, staring at the door for a long time. Then he walked around the side of the house, out of sight. I got out of my car and called his name, but he didn't answer. I walked around the house and found him standing in the backyard, looking up at our bedroom window. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. He just said, "You should leave. She was happier before you." That was it for me. I called the police and filed a report. They talked to Eric, but all they could do was warn him to stay away. He didn't get arrested, and he didn't stop. The texts kept coming, always from new numbers. Sometimes it was just a single word, "Hey." Sometimes it was a photo of our house, or a message like, "I'm watching." We ended up moving a few months later, just to get away from him. My wife still talks to her family, but I keep my distance. Every now and then, I'll get a text from an unknown number, just a single word, "Hey." I delete it every time, but I still check the windows before I go to bed, and I wonder if Eric is out there, still waiting for me to slip up. This happened in late 2021, in Lawrence, Kansas. My wife and I had always pictured a big wedding, maybe at one of the old stone churches downtown, or a fancy event hall. But with all the COVID restrictions, that just wasn't possible. To make things even more complicated, we both caught COVID a few months before the wedding. We were lucky it wasn't too serious, but the medical bills still wiped out most of our savings. By the time we were finally healthy again, we just wanted to get married, no matter what it looked like. We ended up renting the backyard of a family friend's house on the edge of town. It was a quiet neighborhood, mostly older homes with big trees and wide lawns, and the backyard itself was just big enough for a handful of tables and a little dance floor under some string lights. It wasn't what we'd dreamed of, but after months of canceled plans and changing rules, we were just grateful to have a place where our closest family and friends could gather, even if everyone had to wear masks and keep their distance. So, yeah, we were on a tight budget. That's probably why we didn't ask as many questions as we should have. When it came to hiring vendors, most of the big companies were booked solid or way out of our price range, and a lot of people just weren't working. We ended up finding this photographer, Eli, through a Facebook group. He messaged me first, saying he was offering big discounts for couples who had to reschedule because of COVID. I really don't even know if his name was actually Eli, or if anything about him was real, to be honest. Everything about the whole thing felt a little off, but we were desperate and tired. He had a decent-looking website, a bunch of 5-star reviews, and his prices were almost too good to be true. He said he'd had COVID recently and was just getting back to work, so he was offering discounts to help people out. It sounded like a win-win. Looking back, there were a lot of little things that should have made us pause. For one, Eli never wanted to meet in person before the wedding. He said he was being careful about exposure, which made sense at the time. All our communication was through email or text, and he always took a while to respond. When he did, his messages were short, sometimes just a single sentence, and he never answered all our questions. But we were stressed, and honestly, we just wanted to get through the day. The wedding itself was small, just immediate family and a couple of close friends, all masked up and spaced out in this little backyard we'd rented. Eli showed up right on time, wearing a mask and gloves, and carrying a camera that looked way fancier than anything I'd ever seen. He barely said a word to anyone, just nodded and started snapping photos. I remember thinking he seemed nervous, but I figured maybe he was just being careful. During the ceremony, I noticed Eli kept moving around, getting really close to people, sometimes standing behind trees or crouching in weird spots. At one point, I saw him taking pictures of my wife's little cousin, who was playing by herself near the fence. It struck me as odd, but I was too distracted to say anything. Later, I caught him taking photos of my wife when she was alone, not posing, just kind of lost in thought. I remember thinking it was a little weird, but I told myself maybe that's just what photographers do, try to catch the real moments. After the ceremony, Eli disappeared for a while. I figured he was just getting shots of the decorations or the food, but when I went to look for him, I found him in the side yard, talking on his phone in a low voice. He looked up, saw me, and hung up immediately. He just said, "Sorry, work call," and walked off. The rest of the night, I kept catching him in the background, always watching, always just a little too close. When it was time to pay him, he insisted on cash, which I thought was weird, but I was too tired to argue. He left before anyone else, saying he'd send us the photos in a week. A week went by, then 2. No photos, no emails, nothing. I tried calling the number he'd given us, but it was disconnected. His website was gone, and the Facebook group where we'd found him had been deleted. I started to get a bad feeling. I tried searching for his name and business online, but nothing came up. It was like he'd never existed. That's when things got really strange. My wife's mom called to say she'd gotten a weird message from someone claiming to be Eli. But it wasn't about money or photos, it was just a single sentence. "You looked beautiful in the garden." Then my wife started getting emails from random addresses, photos of her from the wedding, some of them taken when she was alone, or talking to her friends, or just looking away from the camera. The subject lines were things like, "You looked perfect," or "Wish I could have stayed longer." No threats, no demands, just those photos and those messages. We went to the police, Mom, but they said there wasn't much they could do. The guy had used a fake name, a burner phone, and a prepaid email account. We never got our wedding photos, and we never heard from Eli again after that. I don't know his motive or what he wants. Stealing photos isn't something an ordinary person does. Maybe he's just some creep who gets off on watching people when they're supposed to be happiest. Or maybe it's something worse. I still wonder if he was even a real photographer, or just someone who used the pandemic as an excuse to get close to people when their guard was down. Every time I see a wedding photographer now, I wonder who's really behind the camera and what they're doing with the pictures you'll never see. I'll keep you updated if anything else happens, or if I ever get my photos. But honestly, I'm not sure I want to know what else he might have done with them.